The blood-red sun dipped low on the horizon as Violet Zimmerman collapsed at the edge of Llano, Texas, her tears mixing with the dust beneath her knees. She had traveled over 300 miles only to find herself stranded in this God-forsaken town with nothing but the clothes on her back and a shattered dream in her heart. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life had just crumbled before her eyes. Vincent Quinn saw her from across the street, a lone figure silhouetted against the fading light. He had been in town less than a day, his cattle drive complete and his men paid. He had intended to enjoy a quiet evening at the saloon before heading back to his ranch. But something about the woman's despair pulled him across the dusty thoroughfare like an invisible thread. She didn't look up as his boots stopped before her, didn't acknowledge his presence until his shadow fell across her tear-stained face. When she finally raised her eyes, they were the color of a summer storm, gray and turbulent. "Madam," he said quietly, removing his hat. "No lady should be crying alone in the street." Vincent crouched down, his spurs jingling softly as he balanced on the balls of his feet. His face was weathered from years under the Texas sun, but his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his hat. "Mind if I sit for a spell?" he asked, his voice gentle. When she nodded, he lowered himself to the ground across from her, crossing his legs in the dust, unmindful of his good trousers. For a long moment they sat in silence, the distant sounds of the town continuing around them as if they weren't there at all. "Tell me everything," he said finally, his voice soft but firm, an invitation and a lifeline both. Violet wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek. "Why would you care?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "You don't even know me." "That's true enough," Vincent admitted, his eyes never leaving her face. "But I know trouble when I see it, and you look like you could use a friendly ear." She studied him for a long moment, taking in his worn boots, the calloused hands that spoke of honest work, and the gentle eyes that held no judgment. Something in her seemed to give way, like a dam finally breaking. "I came to Llano to marry a man I've been corresponding with for 8 months, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Edward Thornton. He owned the Mercantile. We wrote letters back and forth after I placed an advertisement in a matrimonial paper. He sent me money for the stage, promised me a good life here." Her voice broke. "When I arrived, I discovered he died 2 weeks ago. Influenza took him quick, they said." Vincent nodded, his expression somber. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Zimmerman, Violet Zimmerman." "And he wasn't really mine to lose, was he? Just words on paper and promises that died with him." She looked around at the dusty street. "Now I'm stranded in a town where I know no one, with no money to return home to Boston and nowhere to go. Where are you staying tonight?" Vincent asked, his brow furrowing with concern. Violet laughed, a brittle sound that held no mirth. "I don't know. The stage left, and I've been sitting here trying to figure that out for the past hour." Vincent stood, brushing the dust from his trousers before extending his hand to her. "Miss Zimmerman, I'm Vincent Quinn. I own the Double Bar Ranch about 10 miles outside of town. I can't solve all your problems, but I can make sure you have a safe place to sleep tonight and a hot meal in your belly while you figure things out." She stared at his outstretched hand with uncertainty. "Mr. Quinn, I appreciate the offer, but I couldn't possibly. There's a boarding house run by a respectable widow named Mrs. Holcomb. I'll pay for a week's lodging and meals, no strings attached." His voice was firm. "And tomorrow, if you're willing, we can talk about what comes next." Violet hesitated, then placed her gloved hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Vincent replaced his hat, tipping it slightly as he offered her his arm. "Miss Zimmerman, out here in the West, a stranger is just someone whose story you haven't heard yet, and I have a feeling yours is just beginning." As they walked toward the boarding house, Violet felt the weight on her shoulders lighten ever so slightly. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, at least, she wouldn't face it alone. Mrs. Holcomb's boarding house sat on a quiet side street, its whitewashed exterior and neat flower beds a stark contrast to the rugged buildings that dominated Llano's main street. The widow herself answered the door, her sharp eyes taking in Violet's tear-stained face and Vincent's protective stance beside her. "Mr. Quinn," she acknowledged with a nod, "it's been some time since you've graced my establishment." "Mrs. Holcomb," Vincent greeted her, tipping his hat. "This is Miss Zimmerman. She's in need of lodging, and I was hoping you might have a room available." The older woman's gaze softened as she looked at Violet. "You're the one who came for Edward Thornton, aren't you? Word travels fast in a small town, dear. Come in, come in." She ushered them into a tidy parlor, the furniture worn but clean, and the air scented with something sweet baking in the kitchen. "I have a room at the back that gets the morning light. It's small, but it's private." Vincent explained the arrangement, counting out coins from a leather pouch at his belt to cover a week's stay and meals. Mrs. Holcomb accepted the payment with a nod, then disappeared to prepare the room, leaving Violet and Vincent alone in the parlor. "I don't know how to thank you," Violet said, her hands twisting in her lap. "I'll find a way to repay you, Mr. Quinn." "There's no need," he assured her, "but I meant what I said about talking tomorrow. Llano might not be what you expected, but it's not without opportunities." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small card. "This is where I'm staying tonight at the hotel. I'll call on you tomorrow around noon, if that's acceptable." Violet took the card, her fingers brushing against his briefly. "That would be fine, Mr. Quinn, Mrs." Holcomb returned, announcing that the room was ready and supper would be served in an hour. Vincent took his leave with a promise to return the next day, and Violet followed the landlady up a narrow staircase to a small but comfortable room with a window overlooking an apple tree in the backyard. "He's a good man, that Vincent Quinn," Mrs. Holcomb said as she showed Violet where to find extra blankets. "One of the few true gentlemen left in these parts. His ranch is the most successful in the county, even after all the trouble he's had." "Trouble?" Violet asked, curiosity piqued despite her exhaustion. Mrs. Holcomb's lips pressed together. "Not my story to tell, dear, but know that his kindness to you isn't unusual. He's got a reputation for helping those in need." She patted Violet's hand. "Rest now. Things often look brighter after a good meal and a night's sleep." Left alone, Violet unpacked her meager belongings: a spare dress, a nightgown, a hairbrush, and a small Bible that had belonged to her mother. Sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, she finally allowed herself to consider her situation without the fog of panic that had enveloped her earlier. Edward was gone. The life she had imagined for herself had vanished before it could begin. She had no money, no prospects, and knew no one in this dusty Texas town except for a stranger with kind eyes who had found her crying in the street. But she was alive. She had a roof over her head for at least a week, and tomorrow, perhaps, she would begin to find a way forward. When Mrs. Holcomb called her down to supper, Violet washed her face, pinched her cheeks for color, and straightened her travel-worn dress as best she could. She would face whatever came next with as much dignity as she could muster. It was, she decided, what her mother would have done. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the curtains to wake Violet from a deeper sleep than she had expected. For a moment, she lay still, orienting herself to the unfamiliar room and the sounds of a household already bustling with activity. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a sensible blue cotton that had seen better days, but was at least clean, and made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Holcomb in the kitchen, kneading dough with flour-dusted hands. "Good morning, dear," the widow greeted her. "There's coffee on the stove and biscuits keeping warm in the oven. Help yourself." Violet thanked her, pouring a cup of the strong, black coffee and taking a warm biscuit from the oven. As she ate, she asked Mrs. Holcomb about opportunities for employment in Llano. "Well, the school's been looking for a teacher since Miss Perkins left to get married last spring," Mrs. Holcomb said thoughtfully. "Do you have any experience with children?" "I worked as a governess in Boston for several years," Violet replied, hope stirring within her. "And I have excellent references." Mrs. Holcomb nodded approvingly. "You should speak with Mayor Wilson. His office is just off the main street, can't miss it. He oversees the school board." She glanced at the clock on the wall. "If you hurry, you might catch him before his midday meal." Violet finished her breakfast quickly, thanked Mrs. Holcomb, and set out for the mayor's office with directions clutched in her hand. Llano looked different in the morning light, less intimidating, more alive with possibility. The dusty street was busy with wagons and horsemen, and storefronts that had been shadowy and closed the evening before now stood open to the warm May air. The mayor's office was a small, wood-frame building with Town Hall painted in neat black letters above the door. Violet straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. Mayor Wilson was a portly man with a bushy mustache and an air of self-importance that seemed at odds with the modest surroundings of his office. He listened to Violet's inquiry with polite interest that quickly turned to enthusiasm when she mentioned her experience and education. "Miss Zimmerman, your arrival might just be the answer to our prayers," he declared, rising from behind his desk to shake her hand vigorously. "The school has been without a proper teacher for months, and the children are falling behind. When can you start?" Violet blinked, taken aback by his eagerness. "Well, I would need to see the school first and discuss terms, of course." Naturally, the mayor agreed, reaching for his hat. "Let me take you there right now. The building is a bit rustic, but with a dedicated teacher, I'm sure the children will thrive." An hour later, Violet stood in the single-room schoolhouse on the edge of town, trying to hide her dismay. Rustic had been a generous description. The building was sound enough, but it was clear no one had properly cleaned or maintained it since the previous teacher's departure. Dust covered every surface, the blackboard was cracked, and there were only enough desks for perhaps 15 students, though Mayor Wilson had mentioned nearly 30 children of school age in the area. "It needs some attention, I'll grant you that," the mayor said, noting her expression. "But the town council has authorized funds for necessary supplies and repairs, and the position comes with living quarters, a small cabin behind the schoolhouse." He gestured through the window to an even smaller structure nestled among some cottonwood trees. Violet walked slowly around the room, trailing her fingers through the dust on the teacher's desk, her mind racing. This wasn't what she had envisioned when she left Boston, but it was an opportunity, a chance to support herself and perhaps even build something meaningful. "When would you need an answer, Mayor Wilson?" "The school board meets tomorrow evening," he replied. "If you could attend and present your qualifications, I'm confident they would approve your appointment immediately." Violet nodded slowly. "I'll consider it carefully and let you know my decision tomorrow." As they stepped outside, Violet was startled to see Vincent Quinn tying his horse to the hitching post in front of the schoolhouse. He looked up at their approach, tipping his hat to the mayor before his eyes settled on Violet. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her with a slight smile. "I called at the boarding house and Mrs. Holcomb directed me here. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Quinn," the mayor answered before Violet could speak. "I was just showing Miss Zimmerman our schoolhouse. She's considering taking on the position of teacher." Something flashed in Vincent's eyes, surprise and perhaps approval. "Is that so? It would be a fine thing for Llano to have a school teacher again." "I haven't decided yet," Violet said quickly. "The building needs considerable work before it would be suitable for children." Vincent glanced at the dilapidated schoolhouse, then back at Violet. "That it does. But it has good bones, and with the right hands tending to it, it could be something to be proud of." There was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't just talking about the building. The mayor excused himself, claiming other business in town, and left Violet standing with Vincent in the dappled shade of the cottonwoods. "Have you had lunch, Miss Zimmerman?" Vincent asked, untying his horse. "I thought we might talk over a meal, as I promised yesterday." Violet realized she was hungry, the morning's excitement having driven all thoughts of food from her mind. "That would be lovely, Mr. Quinn." He offered her his arm and led her toward his horse, a magnificent bay stallion that stood at least 17 hands high. "This is Thunder," he said, patting the horse's neck. "He's gentle enough despite his size." Before Violet could respond, Vincent had lifted her onto the saddle with ease, his strong hands respectful but sure at her waist. He swung up behind her, one arm reaching around to take the reins, his chest a solid presence at her back. "There's a spot by the creek just outside of town," he explained as thunder began to walk. "If you don't mind eating outdoors, it's peaceful there, and we can talk without half the town listening in." Violet was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of him so close behind her, the strength in the arm that held the reins. It had been a long time since she had been this near to a man, and never one quite like Vincent Quinn, who seemed to embody the rugged spirit of the West itself. "That sounds perfect," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. They rode in comfortable silence for a short while, leaving the town behind and following a winding path through mesquite and cottonwoods, until they reached a small creek where the water burbled over smooth stones. Vincent dismounted first, then reached up to help Violet down, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. From his saddlebag, he produced a surprisingly elaborate picnic cold chicken, bread, cheese, and even a jar of preserved peaches. He spread a blanket in the shade of a large cottonwood and gestured for Violet to sit. "This is quite a feast for an impromptu lunch," she remarked as he uncorked a bottle of cider. Vincent smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something that made Violet's heart skip a beat. "I might have had Mrs. Holcomb pack it for us when I stopped at the boarding house," he admitted. "I wanted to make a good impression." "Consider me impressed," Violet said, accepting a tin cup of cider from him, "though I'm still not sure why you're going to all this trouble for me." Vincent settled himself on the blanket, his long legs stretched out before him, his back against the tree trunk. "When I saw you yesterday, something told me you were different, that you might be important." He met her eyes directly. "I've learned to trust that feeling over the years." Violet took a sip of cider, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "The mayor seems to think I could be the new schoolteacher," she said finally, "but the building is in terrible condition, and I'm not sure I'm prepared for such an undertaking." "What were you prepared for when you came to Llano?" Vincent asked gently. Violet looked out at the creek, watching the sunlight dance on the water. "To be a wife, I suppose, to help run the mercantile, to start a new life far from Boston and all its painful memories." She sighed. "But that future died with Edward." Vincent was quiet for a moment, breaking off a piece of bread and offering it to her. "May I ask what you're running from in Boston?" Violet hesitated, then decided that if he was willing to help her, the least she owed him was honesty. "My father died 2 years ago, leaving substantial debts. Our home was sold to pay his creditors, and I was forced to take a position as a governess in the household of a former business associate, Mr. Blackwell. The arrangement was uncomfortable." Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly. "Uncomfortable in what way?" Violet focused on spreading cheese on her bread, avoiding his gaze. "Mr. Blackwell was a widower with 3 young children. After several months in his employ, he began to suggest that our relationship might become more personal. When I refused his advances, my position became increasingly difficult. The matrimonial advertisement seemed like a way out." Vincent's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "I'm sorry that happened to you. No wonder you were willing to travel so far to marry a man you'd never met." "Edward's letters were kind," Violet said softly. "He seemed honest and decent. I thought we might build something good together, even without love at the beginning." She looked up at Vincent. "Was that foolish of me?" "Not at all," he assured her. "Many successful marriages out here start exactly that way." He hesitated, then added, "My own parents met through a similar arrangement. My father placed an advertisement for a bride when he first settled in Texas, and my mother answered it. They were devoted to each other until the day they died." Violet felt a small measure of comfort in his words. "And what about you, Mr. Quinn? No Mrs. Quinn waiting at the Double Bar Ranch?" A shadow passed over his face, so quickly she might have imagined it. "No," he said simply. "I've been too busy building the ranch to give much thought to marriage." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Violet didn't press. Instead, she asked about his ranch, and his face brightened as he described the spread he'd built over the past decade, the cattle operation, the horses he bred, the improvements he'd made to the land. "It sounds wonderful," Violet said sincerely. "You must be very proud of what you've accomplished." "I am," Vincent acknowledged, but sometimes I wonder if I've been focusing too much on the ranch and not enough on building a life beyond it. He studied her for a moment, which brings me to what I wanted to discuss with you today. Violet felt a flutter of nervousness. Yes. I have a proposal for you, Miss Zimmerman, not a romantic one, he added quickly, seeing her expression. A business arrangement that might solve both our problems. Intrigued, Violet set down her cup. I'm listening. My ranch manager's wife ran the household until 6 months ago when they moved to California to be closer to their daughter. Since then, things have been chaotic. I need someone to manage the house, oversee the domestic staff, and bring some order back to the place. He leaned forward slightly. I'm offering you the position of housekeeper at the Double Bar. It comes with private quarters, good wages, and a respectable position in the community. Violet blinked, surprised by the offer. But you hardly know me. I know enough, Vincent said with quiet confidence. You're educated, resourceful, and clearly not afraid of hard work if you are willing to travel across the country to make a new life. The position is yours if you want it. Violet considered the offer. It was unexpected but not unwelcome. Still, something held her back. What about the school? Mayor Wilson seemed quite desperate to fill the teaching position. Vincent nodded. It's your choice, of course. The school needs a teacher badly, that's true, but it's a difficult job with little support and even less pay. At the ranch, you'd have a comfortable home, fair compensation, and… He hesitated. My protection, should you need it. The way he said it made Violet wonder if there was something he wasn't telling her. Is there some danger I should be aware of, Mr. Quinn? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Llano is generally peaceful, but like any frontier town, it has its share of troublemakers. A woman alone, especially one as… He paused, seemingly searching for the right word. Striking as yourself might attract unwanted attention. Violet felt color rise to her cheeks at the compliment hidden in his warning. I see, and at your ranch I would be safer. Yes, he said simply. My men are loyal and respectful. No one would bother you there. Violet took a deep breath, weighing her options. The teaching position offered independence and a chance to make a difference in the community. Vincent's offer promised security and comfort, but would place her in his debt and under his authority, however benevolent. May I have some time to consider both opportunities? She asked finally. The school board meets tomorrow evening, and I promised Mayor Wilson an answer by then. Of course, Vincent agreed readily. Take all the time you need. My offer stands regardless of what you decide about the teaching position. He began packing up the remains of their picnic. I should get you back to town. Mrs. Holcomb will be wondering where you've disappeared to. As they rode back to Llano, Violet allowed herself to lean slightly into Vincent's solid presence behind her, finding comfort in his steadiness. Whatever she decided, it seemed she had options now more than she'd had yesterday when she collapsed in tears at the edge of town. Perhaps Llano held promise after all. The next day dawned with a clarity that seemed to match Violet's state of mind. After a restless night weighing her options, she had awakened with a decision firmly in place. She would accept the teaching position not because it was easier or safer, but because it offered her the independence she craved and the opportunity to build something meaningful. She dressed with care in her best dress, a modest navy blue with white trim that had survived the journey from Boston relatively unscathed. After breakfast, she asked Mrs. Holcomb for directions to the mercantile, determined to see what had become of the business Edward Thornton had built. Thornton's general store stood at the corner of Llano's Main Street, its wide porch and large windows making it one of the more impressive establishments in town. A bell tinkled cheerfully as Violet pushed open the door, stepping into a space that smelled of coffee, leather, and the faint sweetness of candy. The store was busy, with several customers browsing shelves stocked with everything from tools to fabric to canned goods. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose, carefully measuring coffee beans into a paper sack. "Be with you in a moment, madam," he called without looking up. Violet wandered through the store, running her fingers lightly over bolts of fabric, examining jars of preserved fruits. imagining what her life might have been like as Edward Thornton's wife. Would she have stood behind that counter, greeting customers and keeping ledgers? Would she have lived in rooms above the store or in a house nearby? "Can I help you find something, miss?" Violet turned to find the shopkeeper watching her curiously. "No, thank you, I'm just looking." She hesitated, then added, "I'm Violet Zimmerman." Recognition flickered in the man's eyes. "Ah, Miss Zimmerman, I heard you'd arrived." His expression softened with sympathy. "I'm Samuel Parker. I purchased the store from Edward's estate just last week. I'm terribly sorry about the circumstances." "Thank you, Mr. Parker." Violet glanced around the store again. "It seems Edward built a successful business." "Indeed he did," Parker agreed. "He was well respected in Llano, had a good head for business, and treated people fairly." He adjusted his spectacles. "If you don't mind my asking, what will you do now? I heard you might be taking the teaching position." "News travels quickly here," Violet observed with a small smile. "Yes, I'm considering it. The school board meets this evening to discuss my application." Parker nodded approvingly. "We've needed a proper teacher since Miss Perkins left. The children have been running wild." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, the town council has finally approved funds to repair the schoolhouse. Mayor Wilson was just waiting to find the right teacher before announcing it." This was welcome news indeed. Violet thanked Parker for the information and continued her exploration of Llano, walking the length of the main street to familiarize herself with the town that might become her home. She noted the location of the church, the small doctor's office, and a dress shop that displayed a modest selection of ready-made clothing and fabrics in its window. As noon approached, Violet made her way back to the schoolhouse, determined to take a more thorough inventory of what would need to be done if she accepted the position. With a key borrowed from the mayor's office, she unlocked the building and stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. The room was silent and still, waiting. Violet moved through the space slowly, taking mental notes. The blackboard would need to be replaced, the desks repaired and increased in number, the floors scrubbed, and new books ordered. It would be a massive undertaking, but not impossible. She crossed to the small cabin behind the schoolhouse and unlocked that door as well. The teachers' quarters were basic but adequate: a single room with a bed, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a bookshelf. It was dusty and neglected like the school itself, but Violet could see its potential. This could be her home. Her own space earned through her own efforts, not dependent on a husband or employer. The realization strengthened her resolve. Lost in thought, she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across the doorway. "Making plans already?" Vincent Quinn asked, leaning against the doorframe. Violet turned, surprised but not displeased to see him. "Mr. Quinn, I didn't expect to see you today." He stepped into the cabin, his tall frame making the small space seem even smaller. "I wanted to check on you before the school board meeting." His eyes moved around the cabin, taking in its condition. "So you're leaning toward accepting the teaching position?" It wasn't a question, but Violet answered anyway. "Yes, I think so. Mr. Parker at the Mercantile mentioned that funds have been approved for repairs to the school. That makes the prospect much more appealing." Vincent nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's a noble calling, teaching. The children of Llano would be fortunate to have someone like you guiding them." There was no disappointment in his voice that she could detect, but Violet felt compelled to explain herself anyway. "Your offer was generous, Mr. Quinn, and I'm deeply grateful. But I think I need to stand on my own feet for a while." "I understand," he said simply. "And I respect your decision." He gestured around the cabin. "This place will need a lot of work to be habitable. May I offer my assistance with the repairs? I have men who are skilled carpenters, and I'd be happy to send them to help." Violet felt a rush of gratitude. "That's very kind of you. I wouldn't want to impose further." "It's no imposition," Vincent interrupted gently. "Consider it my contribution to the education of Llano's youth." His mouth quirked in a small smile. "Besides, several of my ranch hands have children who will be attending the school. It's in my interest to ensure their teacher has a proper roof over her head." Violet laughed softly. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? She extended her hand to him. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. He took her hand in his grip firm but gentle. Vincent, he corrected her. If we're going to be friends, you should call me Vincent. Vincent, she repeated, liking the way it felt on her tongue, and you must call me Violet. Their hands remained joined perhaps a moment longer than propriety dictated, and Violet felt a curious warmth spread through her at the contact. When they finally separated, the absence of his touch left her oddly bereft. Will you be at the school board meeting this evening? She asked, hoping to see him there. Vincent nodded. I sit on the board, actually, but don't worry, your appointment is all but assured. The other members are as eager as the mayor to have a proper teacher again. This was reassuring news, and Violet felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. In that case, I should prepare. There's much to do before the school can open. When would you like my men to begin work on the repairs? Vincent asked as they walked back to the schoolhouse. Violet considered. If the board approves my appointment tonight, perhaps they could start tomorrow. I'd like to have the buildings habitable as soon as possible so I can move in and begin organizing the school. I'll send them first thing in the morning, Vincent promised. He paused at the schoolhouse door, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart beat a little faster. For what it's worth, Violet, I think you're making the right choice. Llano needs someone like you. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and strode away, leaving her standing in the doorway of what would soon be her school, watching his tall figure disappear down the dusty street toward the mayor's office. That evening, Violet presented herself to the school board with confidence born of preparation and certainty. The board members, 5 men representing Llano's most prominent families, listened attentively as she outlined her qualifications and her vision for the school. Vincent, seated at the end of the table, watched her with quiet approval in his eyes. The vote was unanimous. Violet Zimmerman was officially appointed as Llano's new schoolteacher, with classes to commence as soon as the building was repaired and ready 2 weeks from the following Monday, if all went according to plan. As the meeting concluded, the board members approached to congratulate her, each offering assistance in some form: books from personal libraries, furniture that wasn't being used, even a cow to provide fresh milk for the children's lunch pails. Vincent was the last to speak with her, waiting until the others had departed before approaching. Congratulations, Miss Zimmerman, he said formally, mindful of the few people still lingering in the town hall. The position is well deserved. Thank you, Mr. Quinn, she replied in kind. I appreciate your support, he lowered his voice. My men will be at the schoolhouse at first light tomorrow. I'll stop by around midday to see how the work is progressing. His eyes held hers for a moment. Until then. Violet watched him go, a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation filling her. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time since arriving in Llano, she felt a sense of purpose, and perhaps the beginning of something she hadn't expected to find in this dusty Texas town: hope. True to his word, Vincent's men arrived at the schoolhouse just after sunrise the next morning. 4 skilled ranch hands, led by a weather-beaten foreman named Hank, set to work immediately on the most pressing repairs. By the time Violet arrived, having enjoyed a leisurely breakfast at the boarding house, the men were already replacing broken windows and repairing the sagging porch of the teacher's cabin. "Morning, miss," Hank called, tipping his hat respectfully. "Mr. Quinn sent us with instructions to get this place shipshape for you. We've brought all the supplies we'll need." "Thank you, Hank," Violet replied, genuinely impressed by the efficiency with which the men worked. "I appreciate you taking time away from your regular duties at the ranch." The foreman grinned. "Boss said this was our top priority. Besides, my youngest will be starting school when you open, so I've got personal interest in making sure you've got a proper place to teach." Throughout the morning, Violet alternated between supervising the repairs and inventorying the school's meager supplies. Mayor Wilson arrived mid-morning with a stack of paperwork for her enrollment records, curriculum guidelines from the state, and a ledger for tracking expenses. He seemed pleased with the progress already being made on the buildings. "Quinn's men do good work," he observed, watching as two of the ranch hands replaced rotten boards in the schoolhouse floor. "You're fortunate to have his support." Violet nodded, wondering at the slight emphasis the mayor had placed on the word fortunate. Was there something more to Vincent's interest in helping her than simple kindness? As promised, Vincent himself appeared around noon, riding up to the schoolhouse on Thunder with another horse trailing behind. He dismounted gracefully, exchanging words with Hank, before approaching Violet with a smile that seemed to brighten the day. "The work is coming along well," he observed, surveying the improvements already visible. "How are you feeling about everything?" "Overwhelmed, but in a good way," Violet admitted. "There's so much to do, but everyone has been incredibly supportive." Vincent gestured to the second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a chestnut coat. "This is Penny. I thought you might need a way to get around now that you'll be living outside of town. She's yours to borrow for as long as you need her." Violet stared at him in surprise. "That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly consider it a loan, not a gift," Vincent interrupted gently. "A teacher needs reliable transportation, especially when winter comes." He stroked Penny's nose affectionately. "She's well-mannered and sure-footed. You'll get along fine." Before Violet could protest further, Vincent changed the subject. "Have you had lunch? I brought provisions." He patted a saddlebag slung over his shoulder. They ate under the shade of a large oak tree behind the schoolhouse, sharing fresh bread, cold chicken, and apples. Vincent asked thoughtful questions about Violet's plans for the school, offering suggestions based on his knowledge of the local families and their children. "Most of these kids have had spotty education at best," he explained. "Some of the ranch families live too far out to send their children regularly, especially in bad weather. You might consider boarding arrangements for those who live more than a few miles away." Violet hadn't considered this aspect of frontier education. "The cabin is too small to accommodate boarders," she mused. "Perhaps some families in town would be willing to host students during the week." Vincent nodded approvingly. "That's a good solution. Mrs. Holcomb might take a couple of girls, and there are other respectable families who would welcome the extra income." As they talked, Violet found herself increasingly drawn to Vincent's practical intelligence and quiet strength. He spoke of Llano and its people with genuine affection, despite occasionally alluding to troubles in the past. "May I ask you something personal?" Violet ventured as they finished their meal. Vincent raised an eyebrow but nodded. "You may ask. I might not answer." "Mrs. Holcomb mentioned you've had some trouble, and you've hinted at it yourself." Violet met his eyes directly. "What happened to make you wary of the town you clearly care about?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he sighed. "It's not a pleasant story, but I suppose you should know, given that you'll be living here." He leaned back against the tree trunk, his eyes fixed on some distant point. 3 years ago, my younger brother came to help me run the ranch. James was everything I'm not: charming, sociable, quick to laugh. The town took to him immediately." Vincent paused, his jaw tightening. "There was a family here then, the Millers. Powerful, wealthy, used to getting their way. The eldest son, Richard, took a dislike to James from the start. It came to a head one night at the saloon. Words were exchanged, then punches. Richard drew a gun. James was faster." Violet's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no, Richard died," Vincent confirmed grimly. "It was self-defense, clear as day, with a dozen witnesses. But the Millers owned the local judge. James was sentenced to hang." His voice grew hollow. "I tried everything to save him: appeals to the governor, bribes, even planning a jailbreak. Nothing worked. They hanged him 2 days after the trial." "That's terrible," Violet whispered, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. "I'm so sorry, Vincent." He covered her hand with his own briefly. "The Millers left town about a year later. Business troubles forced them out. But some folks still remember whose side I took and whose side they took. There are tensions that simmer beneath the surface. And that's why you warned me about potential dangers," Violet realized. Vincent nodded. "Llano is generally peaceful now, but memories are long in small towns. As a newcomer associated with me, you might face some coldness from certain quarters." His eyes met hers directly. Nothing dangerous, just something to be aware of. Violet appreciated his honesty. "Thank you for telling me, I'll be careful." Their conversation turned to lighter topics after that, but Violet felt that something significant had shifted between them. Vincent had trusted her with a painful part of his past, and in doing so, had drawn her closer into his confidence. As the afternoon waned, Vincent reluctantly announced that he needed to return to the ranch. "The men will continue working here for the rest of the week," he assured her. "By Monday, both buildings should be weather-tight and habitable." Violet walked with him to where the horses were tethered. "I can't thank you enough for all your help, Vincent. I don't know how I would have managed without it." He smiled down at her, his eyes warm in the late afternoon sun. "That's what neighbors do out here, Violet, help each other when it's needed." He hesitated, then added, "I'm hosting a small gathering at the ranch next Saturday, nothing formal, just a barbecue for my hands and their families. Would you consider coming? It would be a good opportunity for you to meet some of the children who will be your students." "I'd like that very much," Violet replied, surprised by how much she meant it. Vincent mounted thunder with easy grace. "I'll send someone to bring you to the ranch around midday." He tipped his hat, a gesture that was becoming familiar and oddly comforting. "Until Saturday, then." As he rode away, Violet found herself already looking forward to seeing him again, a realization that both excited and unsettled her. She had come to Llano to marry one man and now found herself increasingly drawn to another. Life, it seemed, had a way of taking unexpected turns. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to Vincent's promise, the schoolhouse and teacher's cabin were transformed under the skilled hands of his ranch workers. By Monday, Violet was able to move her few belongings from Mrs. Holcomb's boarding house to the cabin, which now boasted fresh paint, clean windows, a repaired roof, and even a small garden plot ready for planting. The schoolhouse itself underwent an even more dramatic renovation. The broken windows were replaced, the floor repaired and sanded smooth, the cracked blackboard removed and a new one installed. The desks were mended and additional ones constructed, bringing the total to 30. Most touching of all, Vincent had sent a beautiful oak teacher's desk to replace the rickety table that had been there before. As word spread that the school would soon reopen, parents began stopping by with their children to meet the new teacher. Violet kept a notebook where she recorded each child's name, age, and current level of education. By Friday, she had a list of 28 students ranging in age from 6 to 15, with academic abilities varying just as widely. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm, a perfect day for an outdoor gathering. Violet dressed with particular care in a light blue dress that brought out the gray of her eyes, pinning her dark hair in a simple but flattering style. She told herself it was only natural to want to make a good impression on the families of her future students, but she knew that Vincent's opinion mattered more than she cared to admit. At precisely 11 o'clock, a wagon pulled up outside the cabin, driven by a young ranch hand who introduced himself as Tyler. He helped Violet into the seat beside him, handling her as carefully as if she were made of porcelain. "Mr. Quinn said to take the scenic route, madam, if you're not in a hurry," Tyler said as they set off. "It's a bit longer but prettier than the main road." Violet smiled, touched by Vincent's thoughtfulness. "That sounds lovely, Tyler. I'd like to see more of the countryside." The scenic route took them along a winding creek lined with cottonwoods and willows. Their fresh spring leaves a vibrant green against the blue Texas sky. Tyler pointed out landmarks along the way, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, the ruins of an old Spanish mission, a meadow famous for its wildflowers. "Mr. Quinn loves this land," Tyler commented as they crossed a wooden bridge. "Knows every inch of it like the back of his hand. Says there's nowhere else on earth he'd rather be." "How long have you worked for him?" Violet asked, curious about the man who had come to occupy so many of her thoughts. "Going on 2 years now," Tyler replied. "Best boss I've ever had, tough but fair, and he takes care of his people." He glanced at Violet. "Begging your pardon, madam, but the men have noticed a change in him since you came to town. Seems happier somehow." Violet felt her cheeks warm at this unexpected revelation. Before she could formulate a response, the wagon crested a small hill, and the double-bar ranch came into view below them. It was larger and more impressive than Violet had imagined. A sprawling main house of stone and timber stood at the center of a complex that included a bunkhouse, barns, corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and horses ran in a fenced paddock near the house. Everything spoke of prosperity and careful management. "It's beautiful," Violet breathed, taking in the scene. Tyler grinned proudly. "Wait till you see inside the house, madam. Mr. Quinn's mama had fine taste, and he's kept it just as she left it." As they approached the ranch yard, Violet could see that the gathering was already underway. Tables had been set up beneath oak trees, laden with food and drink. A pit barbecue smoked nearby, tended by a man in a cook's apron. Children ran and played while adults conversed in small groups, creating a scene of relaxed conviviality. Vincent strode toward the wagon as it pulled into the yard, his face lighting up when he saw Violet. He wore a clean white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, dark trousers, and boots polished to a shine more casual than she had seen him before, but no less commanding. "You made it," he said, helping her down from the wagon with strong, steady hands. "I was beginning to worry Tyler had gotten lost." "We took the scenic route as you suggested," Violet replied, suddenly aware of curious glances from the gathered ranch hands and their families. "Your land is magnificent, Vincent," pride flashed in his eyes. "Thank you. I'd like to show you more of it later if you're interested." He offered her his arm, "But first, let me introduce you to everyone." The next hour passed in a blur of names and faces as Vincent guided Violet through the gathering, introducing her as Miss Zimmerman, Llano's new schoolteacher. She met Hank's wife Martha and their 4 children, including 7-year-old Lily, who would be starting school for the first time. There was the ranch cook, Eduardo, whose twin boys were already proficient in both English and Spanish at age 9. The blacksmith, the wranglers, the cowhands each greeted her with respect, many expressing gratitude that their children would finally have proper schooling. Throughout it all, Vincent remained at her side, his hand occasionally coming to rest lightly at the small of her back, a gesture that sent warmth spreading through her each time. He seemed different here on his own land, more relaxed, more open, his rare smiles coming more frequently. After the introductions, he led her to a table set in the shade of a massive oak, where places had been reserved for them among the ranch's senior staff. The food was abundant and delicious, barbecued beef so tender it fell apart at the touch of a fork, beans flavored with smoky bacon, fresh bread, and vegetables from the ranch garden. "Your cook is extremely talented," Violet commented after her first bite. "This is wonderful." "Eduardo is a treasure," Vincent agreed. "He came with the ranch when I bought it 15 years ago and refused to leave when the previous owners did, said the land was in his blood." He passed her a basket of rolls, "Kind of how I feel about it now." As they ate, Vincent told her stories about the ranch's history, dating back to Spanish land grants in the previous century. Violet listened, fascinated not only by the tales but by the passion with which he told them. This was clearly more than property to him, it was his legacy, his purpose. When the meal concluded, Vincent leaned closer to speak quietly in her ear. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch? I thought we might ride out to the North Ridge. The view from there is spectacular." Violet hesitated only briefly. It would mean being alone with him, away from the watchful eyes of the gathering. But she trusted Vincent implicitly, and the desire to spend more time in his company outweighed any concerns about propriety. "I'd like that very much," she replied. Vincent excused them from the table and led her to the stables, where Thunder and Penny were already saddled and waiting. He helped Violet mount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. They rode away from the ranch house at a leisurely pace, Vincent pointing out features of the property as they went: the creek that never ran dry, even in drought years, the stand of pecan trees planted by his father, the fertile valley where he grew hay for winter feed. "You really do love this land," Violet observed as they began to climb a gentle slope. Vincent nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's become part of me over the years. When I first arrived in Texas, I was angry, restless, looking for something I couldn't name. The moment I saw this valley, something settled in me. I knew I'd found what I was searching for." "What brought you to Texas originally?" Violet asked, realizing how little she knew about his life before Llano. Vincent was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. "The war," he said finally. "I fought for the Union, came home to Pennsylvania to find my fiancée married to my cousin and my family's shipping business in ruins." His mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "There wasn't much left for me there, so I headed west with what money I could scrape together." "I'm sorry," Violet said softly, understanding now some of the shadows she occasionally glimpsed in his eyes. Vincent shrugged. "It was a lifetime ago, and if things had gone differently, I wouldn't be here now." He glanced at her, something warm in his gaze. "Some losses lead to unexpected gains." They reached the top of the ridge, and Vincent rained thunder to a stop. "This is what I wanted you to see." Violet gasped as she took in the view. Below them, the double bar spread out in a verdant patchwork of pastures, creek beds, and woodlands. In the distance, blue mountains rose against the horizon, their peaks still holding traces of winter snow. Closer in, a herd of cattle moved like dark dots across a green field, while a small group of wild horses drank from a pond that gleamed like silver in the afternoon sun. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Violet breathed. "Almost," Vincent said quietly, and when she turned to look at him, she found him gazing not at the landscape but at her, his expression making her heart skip a beat. For a long moment they sat on their horses side by side, something unspoken passing between them. Then Vincent cleared his throat and gestured to a flat area nearby with a lone oak tree. "Shall we rest for a while? The horses could use a break." They dismounted, and Vincent spread a blanket in the shade of the oak. They sat together, looking out over the ranch, a comfortable silence between them. Violet was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the clean scent of his soap, the warmth radiating from his tall frame. "May I ask you something, Violet?" Vincent said finally, his voice low. "Of course." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Are you happy with your decision to stay in Llano, to take the teaching position instead of returning east?" Violet considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said with certainty. "I came to Texas seeking a new beginning, and despite the unexpected turn of events, I believe I've found it, the school, the community." She hesitated, then added softly, "The people I've met here. It feels right in a way Boston never did." Relief flickered in Vincent's eyes. "I'm glad to hear that." He hesitated, then continued, "I've grown fond of having you around, Violet Zimmerman." The simple admission made her pulse quicken. "I've grown fond of being around Vincent Quinn." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear that had escaped its pins. The gesture was tender, intimate in a way that made Violet's breath catch. "I didn't expect you," Vincent said softly. "Wasn't looking for anyone to complicate my life, but from the moment I saw you crying in the dust at the edge of town, something in me recognized something in you." "I felt it too," Violet admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "even through my tears." Vincent's hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. "I want to court you properly, Violet, if you'll allow it." Joy bloomed in Violet's chest, warm and unexpected. "I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Vincent's face transformed him, erasing years of worry and solitude. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to refuse, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle yet held the promise of deeper passion. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since our picnic by the creek," he confessed. Violet smiled, feeling bolder than she ever had in her life. "I've been wanting you to." They stayed on the ridge until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, talking of small things and large ones, learning each other's stories, discovering common ground and intriguing differences. By the time they mounted their horses to return to the ranch house, something fundamental had shifted between them, a connection acknowledged, a future glimpsed. As they rode back side by side, Violet felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The road that had led her to Llano had been winding and unexpected, marked by disappointment and tears. But sitting in the dust on that first day, she could never have imagined where those tears would lead her to a school, a community, and a man who looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in his world. The weeks following the barbecue at Double Bar Ranch fell into a pleasant pattern. Violet threw herself into preparations for the school's opening, creating lesson plans, organizing supplies, and meeting with parents. Vincent called on her regularly, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book for her classroom library, flowers from his garden, once even a kitten from a litter born in his barn, which Violet promptly named Scholar and installed as the school's official mouser. Their courtship progressed with a measured pace that respected the watchful eyes of the small community while allowing their feelings for each other to deepen naturally. They rode together on Sunday afternoons, exploring the countryside around Llano. Vincent took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, the finest establishment in town, where his protective presence silenced any whispers about the new schoolteacher and her rapid attachment to one of the area's most eligible bachelors. Through it all, Violet found herself falling steadily, irrevocably in love with Vincent Quinn. She loved his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the tenderness that lay beneath his reserved exterior. She loved the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he helped her mount her horse, the passion in his voice when he spoke of the land he cherished. The school opened on the first Monday of June with 28 students ranging from 6-year-old Lily to 15-year-old James, a rancher's son who had never had formal schooling but could calculate the value of a cattle herd faster than most educated adults. Violet approached the diversity of ages and abilities as a challenge rather than an obstacle, grouping the children according to their proficiency rather than their age, allowing older students to help younger ones, and tailoring her lessons to the practical needs of frontier life. To her delight, the children responded enthusiastically to her methods. Even the most reluctant students, particularly the older boys who had initially resented being sent to school, began to engage with the material when they saw its relevance to their lives. Violet taught not only reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also practical geography, basic agricultural science, and enough history to give her pupils a sense of their place in the world. News of her success spread beyond Llano, and by the third week, 5 more students had joined the school, including 2 girls from a neighboring town whose parents were willing to board them with Mrs. Holcomb during the week, rather than send them to the less structured school in their own community. Vincent made it a point to visit the school at least once a week, often bringing some small improvement for the building or grounds, a new flag to fly from the pole the ranch hands had installed, shelves for the growing collection of books, a proper pump for the well so the children wouldn't have to carry water from the creek. On one such visit, about a month after the school opened, Vincent arrived just as Violet was dismissing the children for the day. He waited patiently on the porch, exchanging greetings with the students as they filed past him, many tipping their hats or curtsying as they'd been taught to do when addressing an adult. "Mr. Quinn," little Lily called, skipping up to him with a gap-toothed smile. "I can read now." "Want to hear me?" Without waiting for an answer, she pulled a primer from her satchel and opened it proudly. "The cat sat on the mat," she read carefully, pointing to each word. Vincent knelt to her level, his expression serious. "That's mighty impressive, Miss Lily. You must be working very hard." Lily nodded vigorously. "Miss Zimmerman says I'm her star pupil." She leaned closer to whisper loudly, "and she says you're her beau. Are you going to marry her?" Violet, who had approached in time to hear this last question, felt her face flame with embarrassment. "Lily, that's not an appropriate question to ask Mr. Quinn." Vincent, however, seemed more amused than discomfited. "It's a fair question," he said, rising to his feet, "and one I've been giving considerable thought to lately." His eyes met Violet's with an intensity that made her heart race. "Though I think that's a conversation Miss Zimmerman and I should have privately, don't you, Lily?" The little girl considered this, then nodded sagely. "Daddy says important talks should be just between the people doing the talking." She tucked her book away and skipped off toward her waiting mother, calling over her shoulder, "Bye, Miss Zimmerman. Bye, Mr. Quinn." When the last child had departed, Vincent turned to Violet, his expression softening. "I hope you don't mind her question too much. Children do have a way of getting right to the heart of matters." "It's fine," Violet assured him, though her cheeks were still warm. "Children repeat what they hear at home. Apparently, the town has decided we're more serious than perhaps we are." Vincent stepped closer, taking her hand in his. "Are we not serious, then?" he asked quietly. Violet looked up at him, her heart in her throat. I didn't want to presume." "Presume," Vincent said, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Please." The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Violet took a deep breath. "I care for you deeply, Vincent, more than I thought possible after such a short acquaintance." "I love you, Violet," Vincent replied simply, the directness of his declaration taking her breath away. "I've known it since that day on the ridge, maybe even before. I just wanted to give you time to be sure of your own feelings." Joy washed through Violet, bright and overwhelming. "I love you too," she whispered, the words she had been holding in her heart finally finding voice. Vincent's face transformed with happiness. He drew her closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Then perhaps Lily's question wasn't so inappropriate after all," he murmured before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that promised forever. When they finally separated, both breathless and smiling, Vincent pressed his forehead to hers. "I had planned a more romantic setting for this conversation," he admitted. "I was going to ask you to ride out to the ridge with me this weekend." "This is perfect," Violet assured him, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. "Though I wouldn't object to that ride as well," Vincent chuckled, the sound warming her from within. "Then consider it arranged." He sobered slightly, his eyes searching hers. "I should tell you that if you agree to marry me, there will be talk. Some people will say you're rushing into things, that we barely know each other." "Let them talk," Violet said firmly. "I know what I feel, Vincent. I came to Llano prepared to marry a man I knew only through letters. With you, I've had the chance to see your character, your heart. I know you in ways I never could have known Edward." The mention of Edward Thornton brought a shadow of solemnity to the moment. "I wish you had found what you were seeking when you first arrived," Vincent said quietly. "But I can't help being selfishly grateful for the circumstances that brought you to me instead." Violet reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I believe things happen for a reason, Vincent. Perhaps I was meant to find you all along." He turned his head to press a kiss to her palm, the gesture achingly tender. "Stay for supper?" he asked, changing the subject to lighter matters. "I brought provisions. We could have a picnic on the schoolhouse steps and talk about the future." "I'd like that," Violet agreed, her heart full to bursting with happiness. As they sat together in the golden light of late afternoon, sharing a simple meal and spinning dreams of the life they would build together, Violet reflected on the strange path that had led her here. From tears in the dust to joy beyond measure, all because a kind-hearted cowboy had taken the time to sit opposite a weeping stranger and say, "Tell me everything." She had told him everything then, never imagining that everything would eventually include her heart, her dreams, and her future. But as Vincent's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own in a promise as binding as any vow, Violet knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. Not in the arms of the man she had traveled so far to marry, but in the heart of the man who had seen her at her lowest moment and reached out a hand to help her rise. The wedding took place on a perfect September morning, with the hills around Llano painted in the golden hues of early autumn. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the small church filled to overflowing with well-wishers eager to see the handsome rancher wed the schoolteacher who had so quickly become a beloved figure in their community. Violet wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Holcomb had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had been sent by her one remaining friend in Boston. Her dark hair was adorned with a crown of wildflowers gathered by her students the previous afternoon. As she walked down the aisle on Mayor Wilson's arm, he having volunteered to give her away in the absence of any family, her eyes never left Vincent's face. He stood tall and proud at the altar, his usually weathered expression softened by a joy that was plain for all to see. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, the rightness of the moment brought tears to her eyes. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, the couple exchanging vows they had written themselves. Vincent promised to cherish and protect her, to be her partner in all things, to love her with the constancy of the stars. Violet pledged her heart and hand to him, vowing to stand beside him through all of life's seasons, to make a home filled with warmth and laughter, to love him faithfully until her last breath. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent's kiss was tender yet possessed a depth of feeling that made Violet's knees weak. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause, the genuine happiness of the community adding to the joy of the moment. The celebration that followed at the Double Bar Ranch was the largest gathering Llano had seen in years. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by nearly every household in town. Musicians played lively tunes that had couples dancing in the cleared area near the barn. Children ran and played among the adults, their laughter a counterpoint to the music. Vincent rarely left Violet's side throughout the day, his hand finding hers again and again, as if reassuring himself that she was real, that she was truly his wife. When they were momentarily alone, seated at the head table watching their guests enjoy the festivities, he leaned close to whisper in her ear. "Happy, Mrs. Quinn." Violet turned to him, her heart so full of love it seemed impossible to contain. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully. "Though I'm a bit nervous about addressing the children as Mrs. Quinn on Monday, it will take some getting used to." Vincent smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "You'll have time to practice. I've arranged for Tyler to take over your classes for the next 2 weeks." Violet blinked in surprise. 2 weeks, but why would? She stopped as understanding dawned. "A honeymoon, if you're agreeable," Vincent confirmed, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I thought we might take the train to San Antonio, stay at the Menger Hotel. It's the finest in Texas." Tears of happiness pricked at Violet's eyes. "That sounds wonderful," she said softly, "though I hate to leave my students for so long." "Tyler was a schoolteacher in Virginia before the war," Vincent assured her. "He's been helping me plan this surprise for weeks, reviewing your lesson plans and preparing to step in. The children will be in good hands." Touched by the thoughtfulness of his planning, Violet leaned in to kiss him, propriety be damned. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips, "for everything." As the celebration continued around them, Violet found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a lonely governess in Boston, trapped in an untenable situation, her future bleak and uncertain. Now she was Violet Quinn, wife of the most respected rancher in the county, beloved teacher to 36 children, and a woman looking forward to each new day with joyful anticipation. All because she had been brave enough to seek a new beginning, and Vincent had been kind enough to sit beside a weeping stranger and offer comfort when she needed it most. That evening, as twilight deepened into night and the last of the wedding guests departed, Vincent led Violet to the porch of the ranch house, their home now. They stood together in the gathering darkness, his arm around her waist, watching as lanterns twinkled in the distance where the last wagons made their way back to town. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Vincent said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Violet leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. "It feels like home already," she replied. "Wherever you are is where I belong." Vincent turned her in his arms to face him, his expression serious in the dim light. "I want you to know something, Violet. I never expected to find love again after what happened years ago. I thought that part of my life was over, that the ranch would be enough." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "But then I saw you crying in the dust and something in me changed. You brought light back into my world." Tears welled in Violet's eyes at his words. "And you gave me hope when I had none," she whispered. "We saved each other, I think." Vincent smiled, drawing her closer. "I believe we did." He bent to kiss her, a kiss that held the promise of the night to come and all the days and nights of their future together. Inside the house, candles glowed in welcome, and a fire burned low in the hearth of the bedroom that would now be theirs. But for this moment, they lingered on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, watching as stars appeared one by one in the vast Texas sky, each one a witness to the love that had bloomed from an unexpected encounter on a dusty street in Llano. 2 years later, Violet stood on the porch of the double-bar ranch house, her hand resting lightly on the swell of her belly where their second child grew. Inside, she could hear Vincent's deep voice reading a bedtime story to their son, James Edward Quinn, who at 18 months already showed signs of his father's quiet intelligence and his mother's curiosity. The ranch had prospered in the years since their marriage, expanding its operations to include not only cattle, but also the fine horses that Vincent had always dreamed of breeding. The school in Llano had grown as well, with Violet overseeing the construction of a second classroom and the hiring of another teacher to accommodate the increasing number of students drawn by the school's reputation for excellence. Their life together had not been without challenges. A drought the previous summer had threatened the ranch's water supply, and there had been tension in town when the railroad finally came through, bringing both opportunity and outsiders with different ways. But through it all, Vincent and Violet had faced each obstacle as partners, their bond growing stronger with each trial weathered together. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Violet heard the creak of the door behind her and felt Vincent's arms encircle her from behind, his hands coming to rest protectively over their unborn child. "James finally asleep?" she asked, leaning back against his chest. "After 3 stories and a glass of water," Vincent confirmed, his voice warm with amusement. "That boy drives a hard bargain," Violet laughed softly. "He comes by it honestly. His father can be quite persuasive when he sets his mind to something." "As I recall," Vincent murmured, his lips brushing the sensitive spot just below her ear, "you didn't need much persuading." "No," Violet agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "Loving you was the easiest decision I ever made." Vincent's eyes, which had grown lighter with happiness over the years of their marriage, crinkled at the corners as he smiled down at her. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if I hadn't seen you crying that day, if I had just walked past or gone the other way?" Violet considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but then I remember something my mother used to say, that there are no coincidences in life, only appointments we didn't know we had." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar lines with tender fingers. "I think you and I had an appointment destiny made long before we knew it." Vincent turned his head to press a kiss to her palm, a gesture that still sent warmth spiraling through her after all this time. "Your mother was a wise woman. She would have loved you," Violet said softly. "And she would have been so proud of the life we've built together." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as more stars appeared in the velvet darkness above. Then Vincent spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I received a letter from the governor today. He's appointed me to the State Education Commission." Violet drew back to look at him in surprise. "Vincent, that's wonderful. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He shrugged, a hint of his old reticence showing through. "It means travel to Austin several times a year. I wasn't sure how you'd feel about that, especially with the baby coming." "I'm incredibly proud of you," Violet said firmly. "Your experience with the school here in Llano will be valuable to the commission, and as for the travel," she smiled mischievously. "Perhaps once the baby is a bit older, I could accompany you occasionally. I've never been to Austin." Relief and pleasure mingled in Vincent's expression. "I'd like that. There's an opera house there you would enjoy, and the Capitol building is quite impressive." Violet leaned up to kiss him lightly. Then it's settled. You'll accept the appointment and we'll work out the details of your travel schedule together. Vincent drew her closer, his hand cradling the back of her head as he deepened the kiss, pouring all the love and gratitude he felt into the connection between them. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured. "I ask myself the same question every day," Violet replied softly. From inside the house came the sound of James calling for his father, his little voice sleepy but insistent. Vincent sighed, pressing one more quick kiss to Violet's lips before releasing her. "Duty calls." "Go," she urged with a smile. "I'll be in shortly." As Vincent went to tend to their son, Violet turned back to the star-filled sky, her hands cradling the new life growing within her. In the distance, she could see the lights of Llano, the town that had become her home in ways she never could have anticipated. She thought of the woman she had been that day in the dust, lost, heartbroken, alone. And of the man who had sat opposite her and said 4 simple words that had changed the course of her life. "Tell me everything." She had told him everything then, her fears and disappointments laid bare before a stranger with kind eyes. What she couldn't have known was that everything would grow to encompass so much more, a love deeper than she had believed possible. A family that filled her heart to bursting, a purpose that gave meaning to each day, and a future stretching before them bright with promise. As the first cool breeze of evening whispered across the porch, Violet Quinn turned toward the warmth and light of the home she shared with her husband and son, grateful beyond measure for tears shed in the dust, and the compassionate heart that had recognized in her distress not just a woman in need, but a kindred spirit and the other half of his soul.